where we ran bingo. We could run bingo as a fundraiser, which was our biggest fundraiser. We made more money on that than anything else. And I ran that and I hated it. And I called and I hated that because the little old ladies will just like roll you in the parking lot if they didn't get the numbers they wanted. So it was pretty interesting process. So that would have been my previous brush with gaming.
Hey everyone, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Trevis Waters, and I created this podcast to share stories that are worth telling. Whether it's about somebody going from zero to hero, hero to zero, or simply something in between. On today's episode, we talk to the wonderful Sue Schneider, where we learn about how early on she has a passion for working in the travel industry, how that shifts into social work, and then, of course, what most people know her best as her time spent in the iGaming event space. Let's jump into our conversation with her now. Enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Trevis Waters, and on this episode, we are joined by the lovely Sue Schneider. Now, for those who may not know you by name or face, just do a quick high-level overview right now in 2025 of where you're at and what you're working on.
Okay, I can do that. I've been in the iGaming sports betting industry for 30 years now, so I got an early start. And primarily have been in the events, trade show, conference space, as well as publications, industry publications. So my experience has been more like big picture. I kind of know what's going on. If you ask me how you operate a iGaming site or anything like that, I don't have a clue. But I've enjoyed over the years putting a lot of people together in the same room and seeing what comes out of it. So currently what I'm doing, I'm still doing a little bit of consulting with SBC on their first pitch for startups, for their women's empowerment initiative, and a few other things. But a year ago now, Kelly Keene, Paris Smith, and myself started Defy the Odds, which is a launch pad for startups to try to help support innovation in the industry. So we've been having a blast doing that. It's a lot of fun. And, partially what I love doing is some of the advocacy work. How do we make it easier for some of these companies? I'm personally a policy wonk, so I love the regulatory and the policy making side of it and seeing how that fits in. So it's been a lot of fun and really enjoying that.
All right. And now the first question I like to lead off with to kind of give us a starting point for our chronological timeline that is Miss Sue Schneider is as far back as you can remember, what was the very, very, very first thing that you remember wanting to be or wanting to do when you quote unquote grew up, and kind of what age were you when you had that idea?
Um, I would say it was when I was early teens, which probably is indicative of my love for travel. I wanted to be a flight attendant. I thought that would be a lot of fun. So never did that. There was a period when I wanted to be a surgical nurse. And then I thought, well, I don't know why I would want to do that. So those were some of my early ones.
So on the flight attendant side, so if that was like the first thing you remember wanting to be, how long did that vision last? And then how quickly did it shift? And why did it shift, I guess?
Well, you have to keep in mind, I'm old. I'll be 75 in December. So this was early 60s. So that was a very, very different era. I probably had that for a couple of years as in my early teens. Um, and I actually had that for a while. And I still think that would be a really interesting at that point in time anyway. I still think that would have been a really interesting career for me, but just things got in the way, so I shifted away from that.
Now, did the shift from the flight attendant to the medical side, was that kind of the one that followed right after that, or did you have a lot of other interests and
Yeah, I think so.
inspirations?
I actually worked in a doctor's office in the latter part of my high school years. And then, I mean, this is kind of a weird story, but I went in to take out somebody's stitches who had this large incision down the whole front of him. And I thought, I'm doing all kinds of things like that in the doctor's office. And I thought that would be really cool. But that one kind of freaked me out because when I came back out, I said, well, what happened? Why did he have that extensive surgery? And they go, well, he swallowed some razor blades as a suicide attempt. It was like, oh, great. Glad you didn't tell me before I went in the room with him. But I don't know. I think when it comes down to it, especially when it's immediate family, it's like I still am kind of freaked out about the medical stuff. But there was a period of time when I thought, oh, well, I could do that. I could do that.
When you finished high school and you went to essentially further your education or look into that anyway, was did you originally go or apply for medical related fields, or have you already shifted off of that by the
No,
time
I
you graduated?
completely dropped that. My undergraduate degree, my husband and I, we got married like a week after he came back from Vietnam. He was in the army there for a bit, and it was not a good experience, obviously. But we went out to San Francisco, lived in San Francisco in 70 to 72, which was a really fun time to be there. And my so we got an undergraduate degree at or I'm sorry, I guess associate's degree, a 2-year degree at City College of San Francisco, and then he wanted to get into real estate, so we decided to come back to St. Louis, and I ended up getting a bachelor's in psychology. And before I had even graduated, I found myself hired to run a runaway shelter for kids 12 to 18. So I did that for 12 years. So I have this whole past life in social services that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, but it's what feeds my interest in a lot of the social service things that are in our industry. So did that, and then through that period, I needed to get a master's degree for our state licensing for we had a shelter, a long-term group home, an alternative school, foster care, counseling, all kinds of things. So I had to get a master's. So I got one in not-for-profit administration, which is a little bit unusual, but it was pertinent for what I needed at the time.
So yeah, I understand the master's degree being specific focus to what was going on, but on going back to the bachelor's of for psychology, did you uh, were you doing the coursework and having like, okay, I'm doing this because this is what I want to use with the degree, or did you just know you wanted to do something with psychology, or did you was it how focused was the path at that point?
I don't think I really knew. To be honest with you, it seemed like a good kind of generic thing to do. And again, this was like 74. So that's when things were really kind of interesting. Again, there was a lot of, oddly enough, I got involved with a national network of services like ours, and a lot of the men that were in there had started as conscientious objectors rather than going in the military, going to Vietnam. They had chosen this kind of service. So I've made some lifelong friends of people that were involved with those kind of social services, and I really have a fond spot for that.
So it's very interesting how all of your interests are tied to even going back to the flight attendant, or essentially tied to helping others. Where I mean, the flight attendant, that's I mean the main concept is helping people on the plane, then going into
Mm.
the medical side, helping people, and then flipping into the social work, helping people. So I like I said, I don't know too much about you pre SPC, so that's kind of why I love doing these shows because I learn a lot about the people that I've known for a little bit. So you've graduated with your bachelor's in psychology, then you get the opportunity in the social work, and then you're like, okay, I need this master's. So was it specific to you can't get a license until you had that master's certificate? Is that how it worked?
Well, for the agency, the executive director, which is what I was, had to have a master's degree. I did not want a master's in social work because I by then had gotten away from direct service. Like I didn't want to be doing counseling and things like that. And we have a private university in the town I'm in. It's called Lindenwood, and they had the specific program for not-for-profit administration. It was really interesting because it was a very broad group. I mean, even like political consultants, social services, people involved with education, all that. A lot of those fell into that. So it was a really eclectic group of students that I had. But it's interesting that you bring up about wanting to help people because I really hadn't thought about that. But I really credit my parents with that. My mom was a longtime Red Cross volunteer. At the time, they called them gray ladies, but she, because of this uniform they had to wear, but she did that for decades. My dad was the same way. He was like volunteer fire chief of our local town's fire department and things like that. So I really grew up with that kind of indoctrinated in me that this is what you should be doing. And I really hadn't thought about it that way until you brought that up, but it really is back due to what my parents, kind of drilled into us even without trying. I think we just watch by example.
So the the social work was that tied to one specific like location, one specific building, or did you like were you taking over this agency that covered the entire state? Because I believe you're still in Missouri at this point.
Yeah.
How wide was your reach on what you were doing at that
Well,
time?
I was the first executive director. It did not exist. It had been like 2 months old by the time I came in. And it started because at the time, runaway kids in our county were, there was no place for them to go. These are typically kids that are abused and neglected. So they were housed in the county jail. And there was one of the county deputies and a local minister who said, "No, this isn't going to work." So they started this thing uh, aimed at being a shelter, emergency shelter, and it was called Youth in Need. And again, it was all 12 to 18-year-olds. And then we grew it from there. I was there 12 years and we grew into several locations and a wide range of programs. Again, it was really kind of trying to meet all of their needs, whether it's housing or whether it was, just counseling, alternative school, all that kind of stuff, just to try to help support these kids. So I still have a dear spot for that one also, and I actually just had lunch the other day with the current executive director, and it is now like a multi-million dollar nonprofit, which it's amazing to see the growth after I left. I mean, they've just continued to build it out in an amazing way.
So you mentioned that you expanded to I believe you said 12 different locations. Was that all within the state of Missouri? And
Oh,
if
that was all in our city, our county.
oh
And it wasn't 12. I think we ended up with like
okay.
four different ones. We had the short-term shelter, the temporary shelter, the group home. They currently have what they call transitional living because kids that age out of that system, if they're 18 on up, they kind of lose support. So they've developed that. We had this alternative school. We had a couple of other things like that. But yeah, it's all in St. Charles City, St. Charles County, Missouri.
And then
So it's very localized.
I know you said you recently spoke with somebody who's now the executive director, and now it's insanely large. Is it national or is it still that big within that state?
Well, what they've done over the years is they've dropped the age also of the programs they offer. They do a lot of Head Start. They really kind of cover Eastern Missouri with Head Start programs, which is one of the reasons I was talking to her because clearly they're going to be getting hit with cuts all over the place, which is really sad. But the Head Start programs and the now they do street outreach. They're going finding kids, out on the street where they are, things like that. So it's broadened. It's more St. Louis metro area and Eastern Missouri. But when we were doing it, it was very local.
And I know you said you did that for quite some time.
Yeah, 12 years.
How did the end of that path come to fruition? Was it you deciding that it was your time, or did something happen that essentially removed you from that?
No, I think I just got tired. I left when it was the Reagan era, and we had previously been successful at getting, federal, state, county, city grants, United Way. I mean, we had a very broad range of funding, and in the Reagan era, there were cuts and they filtered on down because so much of that just kind of cascades, those federal grants would cascade down to these other levels of government. So, I stayed on for a while, but then it was like, okay, I've done this for 12 years. That's I did my turn. So it was a pretty bittersweet time because I really enjoyed it and it was very fulfilling.
Did you have what I refer to on this podcast often as brain baby? Did you have a brain baby around this 12-year mark where you go, I think I can take what I've learned throughout my life at this point and do something else, which is this? Or was it just you were mentally, emotionally tapped out from the 12 years you put in?
I think it well, I did not have anything, to go into at that point. I took the LSAT. I thought maybe I'll do law school because I love all the policy stuff. Didn't do that because my husband says, like, really, what would you do with a law degree? I was like, well, good point. Because I can't stand reading legal documents. He's my paralegal. I make him read everything because I'm basically a writer at heart. My high school English teacher taught me well. And when I read legal documents, I was like, speak English, would you? Because it's just awful. So I didn't do that. But I spent the next 10 years basically doing a lot of freelance writing, a lot of editing, more business publications, things like that. I ran they passed a local convention and tourism tax. I ran that staffed that authority for a few years. I did a lot of different weird things for the next 10 years or so. And then it ended up where I was, they legalized riverboat gaming in Missouri. And so at that point, then I ended up being approached by somebody who wanted to put together a publication for internet. I'm sorry, not internet, for riverboat gambling. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then like in 95, she's like, hey, now there's this thing called the internet. What, you want to partner with me with putting our publication online? It was called Rolling Good Times Online, was the name of it was, in hindsight, it was probably one of the first affiliate sites, to be honest with you. So that's how I ended up morphing into gaming.
Prior to getting the Riverboat Casino opportunity, the time you spent freelancing for writing, what was like a majority, like examples of what you were writing? Was it all like info based
It,
information?
it was a lot of business publications, St. Louis
Okay.
Business Journal, Construction News and Review. I wrote a book during that time that was a local history. And also, like, toward the tail end of that, we had a huge flood. I live out on the Mississippi River, and we had a huge flood in 1993. So I spent 2 years after that working on behalf of a local mental health agency, working with flood um, survivors. And so, that got kind of thrown in there too. So I've been all over the place. It's kind of weird mishmash of things that I've done.
What about the person coming to, I don't know, essentially, I'm going to say poach you because you were freelancing, but bring you on as the Riverboat Casino publication? What about that like intrigued you? Because it doesn't seem like you had anything up to that point that was in the gaming space of any kind. So what
Actually, I did a little bit because I guess it was like 92, 93 when they legalized riverboat gaming. And first of all, I have to say, I do have a past life as a gaming operator because when I ran Youth in Need, we had about 6 years, I think, maybe, where we ran bingo. We could run bingo as a fundraiser, which was our biggest fundraiser. We made more money on that than anything else. And I ran that and I hated it. And I called and I hated that because the little ladies will just like roll you in the parking lot if they didn't get the numbers they wanted. So it was pretty interesting process. So that had been my previous brush with gaming. But I also spent a little bit of time after they legalized riverboat gaming helping a couple of operators who were looking to come into the St. Louis area with their riverboats. And I remember a couple stories from that. We brought a plane load of state legislators down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast to look at one of the casinos of one of the operators that wanted to come up here. And that was interesting because we had to like go and round them up from playing all the games, when it was time to go because they were all out gambling all over the facility down there. Um, and that was kind of weird. And I also went up to our state capitol in Jefferson City on behalf of a couple of these operators. And, I had one friend that I knew from my social service background who had become a legislator. And I went and knocked on his office door and they opened it a crack and he goes, "Oh, Sue, it's you. Come on in." So I went in and there was like a whole poker game going on inside this legislator's office in the state capitol. And I thought, okay, this is weird. But so I had had some brushes with it before I got into that.
What was I guess the was there a growth tree that bloomed within this particular organization of writing all these publications? Was it like you started here and then you became editor in chief, or was it something where you essentially had the same role for X amount of months or years?
I did a lot of freelance because I really didn't want to lock into anything. Nothing had appealed to me for that long time. So even as I was doing some of those, like working with the convention authority and things like that, those were all contractual. I spent a lot of time juggling a lot of things up in the air, just because I didn't really find anything that I really wanted to lock into for the longest time. So I was kind of a floater.
So you always wanted to control your own destiny. Uh,
Yeah, as
and
best I can.
so how did the publication writing for this Riverboat Casino, how did that blossom to the next phase, and what was the next phase?
Well, uh, this woman and I were partners from 95 to 99, I guess. And during that time, I am not a gambler. So we had to get people on to actually write the actual, how do you play blackjack or strategy or whatever, because I don't know any of that. That's my dirty little secret in the industry. Um, but during that time, I had started what was called iGaming News, which was the industry publication within that. And so then she and I kind of went our separate ways in 99. She took the consumer side of what we had built. I had taken the industry, the B2B side of what we had built, and then grew from there to start River City Group, where we did events, publications, that sort of thing. So that's when I started really kind of digging into something that I thought would be really useful.
When you were writing the publications for the specific Riverboat Casino, were you getting essentially hit up by everybody in the state of Missouri that had some sort of gaming? Like, hey, do you also want to write for us? Because I was there a lot of publications going out at that time? Because I know you said that was kind of the intro of the internet, or how did that
Well,
pan
it was
out?
interesting. The reason that she wanted to get on the internet is because she was having trouble getting her public. She had a print publication, like a tabloid style paper, and she was having trouble because she got ads from all of the riverboats in the area. There were like five, I think, four or five. She had advertising from all of them, but they didn't want the publications there because it had ads to the other riverboats in it, their competitors. So she was just having trouble getting some traction in that regard because the people she was dealing with were not open to that. So that's when she came and she goes, "There's this thing called the internet," and from there it kind of blossomed. So, and again, that was like St. Louis metro area, so it wasn't really statewide.
How long did this phase of the freelance writing last for before somebody approached you with an opportunity, or maybe you found an opportunity on your own end where it was, I guess, part time to full time based?
I did the freelance for 10 years. And again, it was primarily writing. It was some video production. It was, it was like running the convention authority, a couple of projects like that. But I juggled for 10 years and you get pretty good at multitasking. But when people are looking at doing that kind of thing, I always let them know it can also be feast or famine. You're either, trying to deal with too many projects or you're twiddling your thumbs waiting for the next one to come in. So.
So it seems like it was almost about the same time as the social work, which was 12 years. So did you have that same internal epiphany saying like, okay, I put time into this. This was a great part of my life. Now I'm ready to move on to something else, or what happened at that 10-year mark?
No, as I look back, I have done little to no planning, with what I'm going to do. Mine tends to be whatever gets in my way, and I either find it engaging or I don't. So, again, when we split off the B2B and I started River City Group, first of all, that was 100% mine. So it was, I had total control with it. And I ended up bringing together an amazing team, an absolutely amazing team. So we started events. At first, we were helping someone else who had some iGaming events, and then we would go and we think, we can do this. And we just had a really good team. So we started with what was called Gigsy in Canada. It first one was in Vancouver, and then we would alternate between Toronto and Montreal. We had events. We had built up to, I think, 7 events total over what would it be? 6 year period, 7 year period. And we started out in Australasia oddly enough, in first two were in Alice Springs, which is out in the middle of the outback. We ended up in Sydney, then we ended up moving that one to Macau. We did EIG, which was that we did jointly with Clarion, that was in Barcelona for many, many years. We had a couple that moved around. A skill games one, a World Poker Congress, so some of those we moved in various places. So we built up kind of a schedule of about 6 or 7 of those events and the publications that and we did books. We did with Tony Cabot, who's a leading gaming attorney in the US, iGaming Report, which was print, which again, some of the stuff we did, and I look at it now and I think, wow, we were really kind of ahead of our time. I mean, because of the way we had done a lot of the things online that people were not used to. So, due to that, I mean, we really got global relationships right out of the chute. So, our strategy was to have one big global event, which was Gigsy, have these regional feeder events that would come in, and the special product ones. So, but even that, it was just sort of like it just evolved. I mean, it wasn't like a big grand scheme of things. That's doesn't seem to be the way I operate. So.
So, what was the first kind of idea you had with these events? Like, what did you expect of them? What did you kind of were designing them in your head to be? And then how did they shift or blossom from like the first couple of years of them to now how they look, 3 or 4 or 5 years later?
Yeah. I think really starting out with conference content was where I always began. If it looked like there was enough interest. And then the trade show part kind of evolved out of that. I think a lot of people kind of do it the other way around where they want to start a big trade show, but I've always been really content driven, whether it's the publications or the events. And I love controversy, so I love bringing in speakers that are, going to have a contrary view, because those are always the ones that everybody remembers. So, I think just trying to stimulate that dialogue, share information, things like that has always been sort of the top of my list as we built out either the events or the publications.
What was the so during this initial wave of doing these events literally all over the world? What was like the uh, I know I don't want to like fast forward straight to SBC, but what was the peak of this first wave of conference events you were doing? Like how many different locations across the globe? How many that you were doing per year? Till it got to a point where you go, okay, I think this is a good number. This might be enough. Let's stop growing. Or did that never happen?
No, it never happened. Um, and again, when we started partnering with Clarion for EIG, that just, we did that jointly. They saw what we were doing in Canada and in other parts of the world, in Australasia. And they, approached us, and it would exhibit at ICE, things like that. And they're going, well, we want to do one of these in Europe. So do you want to do it together? So we said, sure. So we did that for a couple of years, and got to know them a little bit. And then in 2006, partially it was, I was just kind of ready to do something different. And partially driven like by something like capital gains taxes and stuff, who were supposed to start skyrocketing. I thought, okay, well, let's put it out there. So we approached, and one of the other businesses that we had within the company, we did recruitment. We were probably the first ones to do recruitment. We did just a whole variety of things. We did sales, we did brokerage of companies in the industry, things like that. So for a while there, we were kind of all things to all people just because there really wasn't anybody else around at that point in time. Or at least it didn't have as deep and as much of a range of relationships as we did globally. So yeah, I don't think I ever really did um think, okay, well, we're done. But we put it out there. One company, there were really only three, you know, good possibilities for us. Clarion was one, Reed, which had G2E, was another one. And there was a third one, and they had just bought something, so they were digesting that. Reed basically said, "We're going to bring everything in house to our thing, our offices, and we'll get rid of your staff. We'll just keep you as an ambassador," which I didn't really want to do because I had a great staff. So we went with Clarion, and we worked with them for 3 years, and then they came down and shut down the whole operation. So yeah, it was an interesting process, and having done the brokerage too, it's that's why coming back to the startup stuff, it's interesting because trying to talk to people about what they're thinking about what an exit might be, even as they're starting up, it's like I never thought about that. But having learned and gone through that process, I realize how important it is to be looking at that kind of thing early on.
So I know you mentioned the Clarion partnership was roughly 3 years. So I'm trying to on the chronological timeline. They first reached out to you about 2005, 2006. Is that
No,
right?
I think we started doing EIG, European iGaming Summit, with them, I don't know, 2002 or three.
Okay.
We had a couple years of working jointly with them on that, specifically on that event. So that one was co-owned between us. So we had a pretty long relationship with them.
And
And
then
then after we sold, they kept all of us on for 3 years to continue to do what we were doing.
so you had somebody reach out to you to acquire everything you've built, but they're saying they're going to gut the team, and you're staying as ambassador, and you're like, okay, no, doing that. Clarion did not ask or did not mention they wanted to do that. So the entire organization of the global conference slash trade shows essentially was acquired by Clarion. And then how did your role change once that acquisition happened?
Um, Basically running, well, that's a really good question because I think my title really, well, the first title I wanted was instigator. They said, "What title do you want?" And I thought, how about that one? I think I ended up as like MD of the Americas or something, even though our events were global. But we basically spent the next 3 years doing what we had been doing, continuing to build it out. The complication was, as if you'll ask anybody from Clarion, is that about 2 months after they bought us is when the UIGEA passed. And so that kind of freaked them out. I was interested in, uh, moving it elsewhere out of Canada for a little bit, but they didn't really want to do that. So, our event, the year after they bought us, that year, it took a hit because oddly enough, even though it was Canada, people in the industry would be like, well, what if there's a thunderstorm and I get diverted to Detroit? And, our friend David Carruthers had been busted. And so, it was very high profile of what could happen to you if you were an operator online and you get anywhere near the US. So it was an interesting process there for a couple of years.
So 3 years after acquisition, it wasn't just they moved on from you; they literally shut down the entirety of what they acquired.
Well, they kept two or three of the events. They kept Gigsy and ran it in Canada for another year or two, and then moved it to San Francisco because things had kind of eased up a little bit. They kept EIG for a while. They moved that from Barcelona to various places, Copenhagen, some other places like that. I'm trying to think what else they kept. Oh, they had the one in Asia for a while longer. So they did keep a couple. Um, and continue to do that. But again, they got bought by a private equity firm, and that always kind of shakes up things. So
So at this 3 year point post acquisition, where you're no longer in I guess, a working relationship with them, what I know going all the way back to your teenage years of having this fascination for travel, did you take some like decently long sabbatical of, okay, we had this thing acquired, we're no longer working here, I'm going to travel the world? Or did you just go, okay, what's my next project? I get that, that blood flowing again.
yeah, No, I didn't really take much of a break. After I did, I still had a non-compete for a little bit longer. But I got involved in some other events when that was up. There was one called iGaming North America that I did with several partners. There was one called Malta iGaming Summit Summit. I can't remember what the S was for, that I did with some partners. So I really got back into the event as business as soon as I could. But I did it as partnership with other people, so it was a little less um, onerous in terms of my time.
So it kind of sounds like you kind of went back to that freelancing side you were doing with the writing, but now on the conference trade show entity side of things. So were you? I'm assuming at this point, people are that are wanting to run things or create new events are reaching out to you saying, "Hey, like, can you come help us out or come as an advisor?" Or were you so hungry for more opportunities that you were the one essentially going after things that you were seeing as a potential partnership?
Yeah, I think the latter. I just really once you get used to being in charge of things, it's hard to back off. It really it really is. I don't know how to describe that to people adequately, but it's once you get that taste, it's you don't really want to have a boss anymore. Um, but yeah, it's been interesting. I spent a couple years also in that post period working with Gaming Law Review as their editor. And oddly enough, they were the company, the woman who owned that company always would laugh about it, but they were the ones putting on some of those initial events before we even got started and said, hey, we could do this. We could probably do it better. So she still laughs with me about that. She goes, yeah, you put us out of business, but here I am hiring you to do this. Um, I've gotten involved with a variety of other kind of weird little things like that that aren't. There's still a gaming publication. So
So I think timeline wise, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're about 2011, 2012. Is that right for where
yeah,
you were
that's
working
about
for
right.
them?
Yeah.
So at what point uh, I know the first freelance was 10 years of the writing side. So how long did this freelance advisory role, I guess you can say, in the event space, how long did that last for? Or is that something that's still essentially continuous now?
Um, no, I'm pretty focused at this point. I would say I did a lot of that up until the time the Supreme Court decision came down. And just did a variety of things that got in my way that seemed like they would be fun, which is my main prerequisite. So it's in 2018, when the Supreme Court decision came down, my old staff was like, "Hey, let's do it again," and I'm like, "No." So that's when I reached out to Raz and Andy at SBC and said, "Are you guys looking at doing what you're doing over on this side of the pond? And if so, I'll help you." So that's what I did. And, I worked essentially started out as a consultant and went into like a part-time employee with them after that, just because they wanted to give me a VP title. So they had to do that. So I did that for 6 years and, helped build out the one for that is now more, started out in New Jersey as the North American one. We started the LATAM one during COVID, actually, oddly enough. Those two are now co-located in Fort Lauderdale. They purchased the Canadian Gaming Summit, and then they also, which I didn't have as much to do with the Brazil one. Um, but so yeah, we kind of built out a whole contingent of events for them over here at this point.
When you first reached out to them when they were doing their own thing in Europe, how big was SBC over there at the time? Because I'm not. This is about what 2018, so I don't know if I'm trying to remember the first time I went to SBC. It might have been probably the year after COVID, 2021. But how big were they, and how essentially did they? Uh, I guess you got their attention because you reached out to them, but were you keeping your fingers in all the pools of all the countries that were doing things within the iGaming space, and you're like, these guys are doing pretty good. I think I can bring that out of all the people doing events. This is the one I think would have the best success over here in the states.
Yeah, I th a little bit of that. I mean, Andy in particular. And Andy McCarron, who deals with their media side, I had known for years. He's been, he had been a publisher or editor, I guess, sports betting magazine before that. Paul Mills, who does their operations, I had known because we worked together on EIG for many years. So I already knew those guys. And so when I got with them, I just said, if you're going to do something on this side of the pond, then, I can help you out a little bit. But I don't, and I had kept up most of my relationships globally. So I think that was part of it too, is just to be able to bring those other, um, both knowledge as well as the relationships.
I know you mentioned that they essentially wanted to give you some sort of VP title, and I can't. The first thing that popped in my head is VP of Instigating, and I feel like having that badge, like literally wearing a physical badge that said that, would have been the best thing. I hope that all conferences that we attend together for the foreseeable future, that where somebody's like tagline is advisor or startup affiliate operator, that yours just says instigator. I feel like they at least SBC should make that title specifically for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I started out with like community organizer, oddly enough, or something along that line. And then people kept teasing me. It's like, you sound like you put together programs at like a nursing home or something. So it's like, okay, so that's when it switched to, and I crowdsourced my VP of growth and strategy, I think on Facebook. I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. What should we call it? And that's the one we ended up with. So it was kind of fun.
So I know you said your relationship with SBC started about around COVID, not COVID, sorry, the Supreme Court ruling in 2018. So about 6 years or so, you're with SBC, growing it in the States. At what point, I guess how, I'm not familiar with how that relationship, I mean, it didn't end because I know you're still, you have your toes dipped in many pools, but how did that role end with SBC? And was that something where it was the same, where you're like, okay, I did this, I had success with this. Now I want to kind of focus on something else, which is,
Yeah. Well, and you did ask about like how big they were and stuff. I think
yeah.
when I was with them originally, they had like 40 staff or something. They're up to like 150 plus at this point. So it's grown dramatically. Um, and I think for me, it was partially, my two good friends that I'm now business partners with, we were sort of all looking to do something that we could really dig into. And all of us love startup. We all love dealing with underrepresented folks because, all three of us have been involved with that kind of stuff over the years. So, heavy into a lot of the women in gaming groups and those sort of efforts. So we just decided, hey, we're all kind of like antsy to do something a little bit different, and probably at this point, I guess it was a little over, it was probably 15, 16 months ago. Paris said, well, come down to Curacao. So we went down there and hung out in her pool and hung out down at the beach and got a whiteboard and started saying, okay, well, what do we want to do? And that's where we came up with the launchpad idea.
I don't think anybody on planet Earth has ever said no to that question, to come down to Curacao. Like,
Yeah,
nah, you
right.
know what? No, that's just not for me. Uh, so I know from especially when you're in your freelancing side of on the publication side, when you're doing kind of working on a million things at once, you get really good at multitasking. What was the thought process in this instance where you're have that role with SBC, you're talking to Paris, you're talking to Kelly about these opportunities to start something together, of course, on the wonderful beaches of Curacao. What part was saying, even though I know I crush multitasking, I want to divest myself from SBC and focus solely on this new opportunity?
Well, I think all of us, Kelly had worked with a VC firm for a while. Paris does angel investing. And again, for me, I'm interested in, I guess, people that don't have a voice, and startups do not have a voice. When you're talking with legislators, you're talking with regulators, you're talking with other people. There are a lot of very expensive, high paid, high priced, uh, high profile lobbyists out there on behalf of a lot of the existing companies. But startups don't have a voice. So I think that's the part that kind of interested me more than anything else. I've always been into like systematic kind of adaptations that need to take place. And that's the part that I really love is looking at how can you create something here that's going to be a little bit more friendly, take into account what the special issues are of a startup and things like that, so they can bring innovation into the industry. Because I'm presuming that people want innovation in the industry, but then, we're far enough along in this industry that it gets a little entrenched.
So we finally caught up to now 2025, where you're working with the wonderful woman of Defy the Odds. The the question I like essentially wrapping everything up with is from the early days of having the travel interest, wanting to be the flight attendant, to now the role you have with Defy the Odds. There's a lot of things that happened along the way that I like to refer to as butterfly effects, whether they were decisions that were in your control or outside of your control. So if we're looking on the grand scheme of this entire chronological storyline, what is that one specific butterfly effect, again, whether it was in your control or outside of it, that you believe was the main or the major deciding factor to get you to where you are today?
That's hard.
That's why I save it for
That's
the
really
end.
hard. That's hard. I mean, I don't think I could point to one because, again, I don't ever plan anything. And my whole life, I've just kind of been rolling with the punches and seeing where there's an opportunity that seems like it would be of interest to me. So, boy, I don't know what I could point to in that. You stumped me.
So, if I were to presume, which of course this is just me based on the storyline alone, I believe it goes all the way back to what you were saying early on about your parents instilling the desire to help other people, because this entire like you said, it's something you never thought about in the way that I brought it up, but this entire thing, like everything you were doing was essentially helping somebody, and now the role that you have with Defy the Odds is like the mega brain baby of that brain baby of you're doing as much possible for the miss or the underrepresented people of the industry. But if I were to guess, that's what I would say was the kind of the biggest. I'm gonna say it's even a turning point.
I think you're right. I think it's partially that. And I think if I did have to point to something, when I go back to my getting my master's, they called it a culminating project, but it was basically a thesis, was on and this would have been 1980. It was on networking. And so I say if there was one other thing, it's just just a tremendous focus that I have on doing that in a way that's going to have a benefit not only for those individuals that are there, but also for, moving things forward as a group, as an industry, as a community, whatever. I would say probably those two things would be the things that were the biggest forces that maybe have guided what I've done over the years.
It definitely wasn't the old ladies in the parking lot trying to cut you for not calling
Trying to
B12.
roll me. No, especially now that I am one. So, I mean, I have to watch how I say that at this point.
When you said that, oh man, I just try to picture a visual of so that I know this is not on topic, kind of going back to something we said, 20 minutes ago, but they were actually very upset with you because
Oh,
they
yeah.
thought that you, what, like rigged the system?
No, just because I didn't pull the numbers that they wanted. And God forbid you make a mistake. If you say the wrong number like accidentally, that's when you're
And they've
really
like already marked it with their pen and they're like, no, I can't unmark it now.
right. And they all have their little like Smurfs and all these, little good luck charms, or it was crazy. I hated it. I hated it.
Oh man, I feel like I can't get that image of you getting chased in a parking lot out of my head. But Sue, thank you so much for coming on this show and sharing your story with us. For those that are watching on YouTube, you see the name underneath her face there, where it's Sue Schneider. You can add her on LinkedIn if you want to learn more about Defy the Odds, or just go to defytheodds.com. If there's any last words you have for the viewers and listeners, the floor is yours.
What about the tagline?
Oh, yeah, I haven't brought that up. So, for those that made it this far in the episode, we're gonna finish with something funny. So, when I don't know, somebody, I posted on LinkedIn that I'm looking for people that want to be a guest, and one of our mutual friends tagged Sue and said Sue would be great for the show. And then the first thing that Sue commented was, "I would love to get high with Trevis," and I said I'm stealing that. So I still have to figure out how to deliver that into the show content of, "Hey guys, this is the How I Got Here podcast. Now it's time to get high with Trevis." Yeah, I'm still playing around with that, but yeah,
Yeah.
that tagline's going to come into effect, and that's all thanks to
And
Sue.
any dispensaries out there that want to sponsor it, go for it.
Oh
No, this has
man.
been fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you again. And if you guys want to listen to more of the episodes, please subscribe to whatever you're watching this on or listening to this on every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. See you guys later. Thank you.